Torah Hey and Likutei tinyana. Rabbeinu Zal, this Torah was said the one Rosh Hashanah before Rabbeinu Zal's Histalkus, meaning Rabbeinu Zal passed away on Sukkot. This Torah was not said the Rosh Hashanah before his passing, but the Rosh Hashanah before that. And there are a whole list of circumstances around which this Torah was said. Some of them we're going to discuss during different parts of the Torah. Some of them we'll discuss at the end. One or two things we're going to mention as introduction. Number one, Rabbeinu Zal, this Rosh Hashanah, when he spoke, he mentioned to some of his Talmidim that throughout that summer, many people had approached him, speaking to him about problems in Emunah, about difficulties they were having as far as Emunah in Hashem and Emunah Sadiqim. And Rabbeinu Zal, that Rosh Hashanah, dedicated his whole shir to the topic of Emunah. Now we're going to find this Torah happens to be the longest chapter in Likutei in size, and the fact that it was said the Rosh Hashanah before the last Rosh Hashanah of Rabbeinu Zal's life would mean probably that it's approximately the second most important Torah that Rabbeinu Zal said in his lifetime. In other words, that was said at the most important time of the year and the closest to his passing. And there's a tremendous quantity of information that's found in this Torah. But as many of the long Torahs, it requires a person has to take it one piece at a time, chew up one piece at a time, and try to understand it as well as you can, and then take another piece, understand that, and a third piece, and then as you keep adding on pieces, reviewing so that you're in a position to tie together pieces 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and so on and so forth. We're going to try to explain everything the best we can. Rabbeinu Zal bases this Torah on a pasuk in Tehillim, which we said that there are 3 outstanding chapters in Likutei that are called Tiku, that are based on the pasuk Tiku b'chayde shofar b'ches yom chagenu, which is a special pasuk that we say on Rosh Hashanah, that everybody in the shul says together. Just like on Shabbos, we have the tefillah of V'shamru b'nei Yisrael es HaShabbos, which is a special tefillah for Shabbos. Pasuk says, Tiku b'chayde shofar b'ches yom chagenu ki chayk liYisrael hu mishpat Likutei Yaakov. We said that there are 3 tikus in Likutei. The first, in the second half of Likutei, the 1st, 5th, and 8th chapters are based on this pasuk Tiku b'chayde shofar, and Rabbeinu Zal said these 3 chapters of Likutei on 3 consecutive Rosh Hashanahs. Tiku Memshala was said 3 years before his passing. Actually, 3 Rosh Hashanahs before his passing. Tiku Emunah was said 2 Rosh Hashanahs before his passing, and Tiku Teichacha was said the actual Rosh Hashanah before Rabbeinu Zal passed away. Rabbeinu Zal begins with the words Ho'ikar hu ho'emunah. The main thing is Emunah. The main thing. Ikar means foundation, and Ikar means most important. And this item we were zeicha to hear from Rebbe Yochaim in Eretz Yisrael, that whenever Rabbeinu Zal uses this word Ikar, he's implying that there are many things. In other words, not that we're saying there is only one thing, there are many things. Just like when a soldier goes out to battle, he carries with him different things. He carries a gun, he carries a grenade, he carries a knife, he carries a shield, a vest, a bulletproof vest. He's carrying different tools of war. But if a soldier were asked, given that you could only take one of these with you, which one would you pick? A person has to be in a position to prioritize, to be able to figure out of all of these different tools that I have, which is the most important. So that if I'm put into a situation where I have to depend on one item, which is the item that I'll have to depend on? That I'd be making the most correct decision in picking this one to default to rely on this just one. And Rabbeinu Zal brings this regarding tefillah in a chapter in the Likutei that we had earlier, where Rabbeinu Zal said that Ikar klei zayin shel Moshiach hi tefillah, that the main weapon of Moshiach is going to be tefillah, implying that Moshiach is going to use many weapons. But out of all the weapons that he's going to use, the choicest one, the most important one, is going to be tefillah. Here Rabbeinu Zal says, in religion, when we discuss the whole scope of religion, if there's ever a choice between emunah versus anything else, you should know ha'ikar hi emunah. A person could be the most learned person in the world, go to mikveh 10,000 times a day. If he's lacking in emunah, it means there's a hole in any mitzvah he does. Any mitzvah he does has a big hole in it. And chas v'shalom could be classified as avodah zarah, possibly in certain circumstances. We mentioned the Baal Shem Tov says, "V'sartem v'avadetem elkem acherim," that if a person makes the slightest turn away from Hashem, it's as though he were worshiping idols. In other words, it's either or in this world. It's not like a person can say, "Well, I'm sort of in the middle. I don't really believe in Hashem, and I don't really believe." Baloney. If you turn away from Hashem, the pasuk says that the tiniest turn away from Hashem is considered as a turn in the direction of idol worship, chas v'shalom. So that a person has to be more alert, more careful. There's no jokes and there's no taking it easy. A person has to be very serious about deciding exactly where he wants to position himself. So Rabbeinu Zal says, "Ho'ikar hu emunah." The main thing is emunah. V'tzorech kol echad lechapes es atzmai. Each and every person has to search himself constantly, to search within himself and to analyze himself and to study where he's holding in emunah. Where is he holding in faith in Hashem and in faith in tzaddikim? And to strengthen himself in emunah. And here we pause for a second, because this is an item that Rav Nachman Shigarin Zal mentions, and Rebbe Zal thought this significant enough to mention in his shir. The fact that Rav Nachman Shigarin Zal points out, Rabbeinu Zal mentions that a person has to search within himself to see where he's holding in emunah, and then Rabbeinu Zal says, and a person has to strengthen himself in emunah. What's the connection between these two statements? Rav Nachman Shigarin Zal points out that a person could search himself and find himself lacking in emunah, and because he finds himself lacking, that his faith in Hashem or his faith in tzaddikim is not 100%, that thought alone causes him to fall into a depression, or to give up hope on himself, or to fall into a despair. Therefore, Rabbeinu Zal says a person has to do the type of searching. When a person searches within himself, we're talking about searching constructively, not searching destructively. He has to search and perform a type of search where a search which will strengthen him, where he's not going to take the attitude that if he's weak, so he's weak. He's going to take an attitude that if he's going to find a deficiency, if he's going to find a weakness, he's going to start applying himself to plug that hole, to do whatever is necessary to be mashlim the emunah. Rabbeinu Zal explains, Kiyesh Seivlei Chaloim. There are people who suffer sicknesses. Sheyesh Lahem Makois Muflois. They have awesome kinds of sicknesses, Rahman al-Islam, awesome suffering in illness. And the reason why they suffer these illnesses is only because of a deficiency in faith. Now note, throughout this whole chapter, I want to make this very, very clear. Throughout this whole chapter in Likutei, whenever we're going to use the word faith, we're implying automatically two items side by side, faith in Hashem and faith in tzaddikim. And if you look in the Likutei Halachos and the Parparos L'Chochma Adam Afarshim, they make this very clear that in this chapter, Likutei specifically, we're talking about both faith in Hashem, faith in tzaddikim. So Rabbeinu Zal says that there are people who suffer awesome types of sicknesses, and the only reason for their suffering is because of a deficiency in emunah. The Bechina says, the pasuk says, V'hiflo Hashem es makoischo, makois gedolos v'ne'emonos v'choloim roim v'ne'emonim. Hashem will place upon you wondrous types of plagues, sicknesses, and note, the pasuk uses the word makois gedolos v'ne'emonos. Ne'emonos means trustworthy illnesses. Ne'emonos is miloshen emuna. V'choloim roim, and very bad sicknesses, v'ne'emonim, and trusted ones. Rabbeinu Zal says v'ne'emonim daika. The pasuk mentions this word v'ne'emonim twice to emphasize, to stress something to us. Kihem boim rak kihem boim al yidei pigam emuna. These wondrous types of sicknesses. We're not talking about a regular type of sickness here. We're talking about a major sickness. These sicknesses come because of a deficiency in faith in Hashem. Ki al yidei, or a deficiency in faith. Ki al yidei nefilas o emuna boim makois muflois she'en moyel Through a deficiency, a decrease in a person's faith, that brings upon a person wondrous sicknesses, Rahman al-Islam, for which no medicine helps, no tefillah helps, and no zechus avos helps. These three things, Rabbeinu Zal points out: medication, tefillah, or zechus avos, the zechus of one's parents or grandparents, or the zechus of tzaddikim whom he's attached to. Even those things can't help the person, chas v'shalom. Ki kol harafuos heimali. Rabbeinu Zal is going to explain now why. Why is it that a person who's deficient in emunah can put himself into a predicament where medication can't help, even tefillah? Imagine a person could be in a situation where tefillah will not help, chas v'shalom, and even zechus avos won't help. Rabbeinu Zal says, Ki kol harafuos heim al yidei asabim, because all types of medication generally are based on herbs, grasses. Ve'hem gedelim rak al yidei emunah, and these grasses, their nourishment comes only through faith. Kamay Sham Razal, as the Gemara says in Tainis, Ein hagishamim yardim ela b'schus emuna. The Gemara says that any rain that comes to this world comes only because of the baalei amona, only because of the people who have true faith. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, emes me'eretz titzmach v'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf. That truth, emes, over here refers to a person. The Gemara there is referring to a person who conducts his business. Masa umatin be'emuna is called emes. So the word emes and emunah here are interchangeable. The word emes here implies emunah. Emunah me'eretz titzmach v'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf. That when there is emunah, then this tzedek will come forth from the heavens. What is tzedek? Rashi Kodesh says tzedakah is an inyan of chesed. Tzedek is an inyan of din. Rashi brings there in the Gemara. What's the din? The din is geshem, mazkirin gevurais geshamim. The Gemara in Tainus begins that rain is a concept of din. So when the pasuk says v'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf, tzedek refers to rain, din. That when there is emes, which means emunah, masa umatin be'emunah, then there will be rain. Shekishiyesh emunah, oz yardim shamim, then rain, when there is emunah, then rain comes down, v'tzimchem asabim, and the grasses grow. So medication, which is totally dependent on herbs and grasses, and the herbs and grasses are dependent on rain, and rain is dependent on emunah, period. But through a deficiency in emunah or a decrease in emunah, ein geshamim, this holds up the rain, this prevents the rain from coming. Va'azai ein refuah, and then chas v'shalom, there can be no cure. That's number one. Now Rabbeinu Zal explains a second point. Gam also ikar koyach harafuah sheyesh b'chol esev, to explain this a little bit more elaborately now. The power, the medicinal power that's found in every different type of grass, hu al pi haseder sheyesh lahazroim, is dependent on the sequence or the seder of the seeds, lefi hamokoim u lefi azman, according to their location and according to the timing involved. Rabbeinu Zal now is going to explain that in order for a medication to work, it's dependent on seder, number one. It must be presented with a certain type of sequence. It must be grown and taken in a certain type of specific sequence. Plus, it's dependent on time and location, time and space. Why? Rabbeinu Zal explains. Ki yesh esev, there is a certain type of grass or herb, she'ikar koyach l'rapois hu rak kishekoitzar noisoi ad sheloi hevi shlish. There are certain herbs which their whole medicinal power is only when these herbs are cut before they have grown a third of their full growth. Now we find this mentioned in the Gemara in a few places. The Gemara discusses olives specifically, that olives, the oil that comes from olives, there's a major difference in halacha in certain cases, in the bracha that you make different things, depending on whether the olive has grown a third of its full growth, or 2/3, or the full growth. There's definitely a difference. Now we know certain herbs that go into medication, there also obviously, there is a difference. Certain herbs, in order to be just right, to have just the right power, in other words, for example, we know certain kinds of lettuces, romaine lettuce, let's say, when it starts growing, it's very, very bitter at its core. it's very, very bitter, whereas the leaves that grow as it advances in growth are sweeter, less bitter. Here also, Rabbi Nizal explains certain medicines, their power is only when this herb is cut before it has reached a third of its maturity, a third of its completion. V'chein yesh esev, and if it passes a third of its growth, that herb will no longer be able to serve as a medicine. And there are certain other herbs with their power to cure is only if they have grown to their full growth, not just to their full growth, but to the extent where they're overgrown a little bit, where they don't even have to be cut, they fall off the tree by themselves. That's how much mature they are. And many different variations of this, according to the timing that's involved in that specific type of herb. And there also is a significance to the location. In one type of location, in a warm climate, there are certain herbs that can be grown and certain herbs that can't be grown. Whereas in a cold climate, there are certain things that can grow there, certain things that can't. Rabbi Nizal says, and the main power of herbs to be able to cure is very much dependent on these two items, location and timing. Rabbi Nizal says now, V'seder hazroim hu al yidei emuna. The sequencing in terms of time and location of seeds from which plants grow, is dependent on faith. How do we know this? Rabbi Nizal says, Bebechinas, as the Gemara says in Shabbos, Emuna zeh seder zroim. Emuna, that refers to the sequence of seeds. The Gemara over there in Shabbos is discussing the names of the 6 divisions of Shas: Zroim, Moyed, Noshim, Nezikin, Kodshim, Ta'aros. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk. There's a pasuk in Navi where the pasuk says, V'hoya emunas itecha chaysen Yeshua is chachma bin avadas, something like that. So the Gemara says that the 6 words that are used in this pasuk correspond to the 6 sections of Shas. The Gemara says the first word, Emunas zu seder zroim. The word emuna refers to the section in Shas. Seder means a section in Shas called zroim. The first section of Shas, brachas, peyat, ma'ai, kalayim, shvias, trumas, all of those mesechtas which deal with planting, shmita, truma, meiser, all of those things. Those all refer to emuna. Why? The Mefarshim give many interpretations. One of the interpretations that's given is that one of the most ideal examples of faith is a person who plants a seed. Because we know that according to if we went by the normal laws of nature is that if I put something into the ground, it rots. Yes or no? If I take a piece of food or anything and stick it into the ground, it'll rot. And here, the concept of planting is a concept where I take a seed, the seed in the ground rots completely, it actually spoils and begins to break apart, and from that spoilage and breaking apart, suddenly begins to grow a plant, a tree, a full tree with fruit and everything on it. So we see that zroim, seeds, planting, is a concept of emuna. It's totally an emuna. And the Gemara over there says that emuna zeh seder zroim. Seder means the section in Shas. Seder also means this sequencing of time and location. So Rabbi Nizal says, Shayidei emuna naseh ha-seder shel zroim lefi hazman v'hamokim. Through emuna, through a person's faith, that's what provides the correct sequencing as far as time and location. Shayidei zeh yesh lahem koyach l'rapos, which is what gives these herbs the power to be able to effect a cure. V'al kain, therefore, al yidei nefilas emuna, through a deficiency in emuna, ein moyil refuos, medicines will not be able to help a person, because in order for the medication to work, it requires this seder of zman and mokom. What provides the seder? Emuna. If a person is lacking in emuna, Hashem will see to it that the herbs that he tries to use for medication will be coming from grasses that grew either in the wrong place. They tried to grow a certain medicine. Picture trying to grow oranges, in Alaska. Even if you get an orange, even if you get something that looks somewhat like an orange, obviously it's not going to taste like it, or it's not going to be able to have the same effect as an orange should have. Here also with medicine, if a person is lacking in emunah, chas v'shalom, he will not be zeichet to have a medication that comes from herbs that were grown in the proper place and with this proper timing. That's number one. Number 2, v'chein tefillah, hu gam kein bechinas emunah. We know that tefillah is also tied into emunah, faith in Hashem. K'may as the pasuk says in Chumash, vayihi yodov emunah. The pasuk says about Moshe Rabbeinu that his hands were stretched out in faith. V'targuma in the Targum says prishan b'tzloi. His hands were outstretched in tefillah. So we see that these two words are used interchangeably, faith and tefillah. So we see how dependent tefillah is on faith, that without faith, you don't call it tefillah. If a person davens without emunah, that's not called tefillah, chas v'shalom. V'chein zchus avos, and so too the concept of zchus avos, the merit of one's forefathers. Also, nizgale gam kein rak al yidei emunah, the whole concept of zchus avos only comes when a person has faith. Where do we see this? Bebechinas, there's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim that says, Hanitzonim niru ba'oretz. The flowers appeared on the surface of the ground. And the Zohar HaKadosh says, Hanitzonim ilain avon. The nitzonim, the word nitzonim refers to the forefathers of the Jews. And the Zohar HaKadosh proves how and why. HaKadosh proves that Nitzonim refers to the Avos HaKadoshim, that Hanitzonim niru ba'oretz, the Nitzonim were seen on the surface of the earth. The Zohar HaKadosh says, Hanitzonim ilain avon, kamashikoz of the Zohar HaKadosh, heim nirin v'nizgalin ba'oretz. When are the Nitzonim visible? Ba'oretz. Hanitzonim niru ba'oretz. Eretz is the concept of emunah. Rabbeinu Zal says, Shehi bechinas emunah. Eretz is emunah. Kamashikoz, as the pasuk says, Shchon eretz ure'ei emunah. Live in the land and draw faith, referring to Eretz Yisrael. That a person who lives in Eretz Yisrael is able to really draw faith. So we see that the word eretz refers to emunah. The pasuk says, Hanitzonim niru. When are the Avos HaKadoshim able to be seen? When is a person able to feel the effects of their forefathers, to be able to draw on these chus avos? When? Ba'oretz, through the power of emunah. Emunah is what allows a person to be able to draw on the merit of his forefathers. Rabbeinu Zal says, Bechinas Ofar. Now Rabbeinu Zal explains a little this concept of Oretz, why emunah is called Eretz. Because Rabbeinu Zal says Eretz means the ground, the dirt. And the Tikkunei Zohar tells us, Bechinas Ofar Mana de Kulhu. The Tikkunei Zohar says that dirt is the keli for everything. We know that when Hashem created the world is made up of Daled Yesodais, 4 basic components: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Ofar, fire, water, air, and dirt. The Tikkunei Zohar says that these 4 correspond to the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Ofar corresponds to the last Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Malchus, which is the Koilel that contain. Malchus is the Keli. All these spheroids, all the first 9 attributes of Hashem, Keser, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, all of those attributes have no significance whatsoever, chas v'shalom, unless they shine into the Malchus. The Malchus is called the Keli, which contains the light. It receives into itself the light of all the 9 spheres above it, and it is the one that's charged with the task of disseminating the light of the upper 9 spheres to all the rest of the world. So the Malchus is referred to as a Keli. So too Ophor, which is the 4th of the Daled Yesodais, it corresponds to the last Hey of Hashem's name Yud Kei Vav Kei, which corresponds to Malchus, which the Tikkunei Zohar calls Mani de Kulhu. It's the Keli of everything. It's the vessel of everything. It contains in it everything else. The concept of Malchus has included within itself all the other spheroids, all the other midos. Rabbeinu Zal says, Al Kain, therefore, Al Yedei Nefilas Emunah, through a deficiency in Emunah, Ein Moyeloi, Loi Refuah, V'loi Tefillah, V'loi Zchus. A person could put themselves in a situation where Chas v'Shalom, medicine could not help them, or Tefillah couldn't help them, or Zchus couldn't help them, because we've proven how all of these 3 things, in order for them to function, they're dependent on Emunah. Zchus Hanitzonim Niru, when does this Zchus shine forth? Ba'oretz, only if there's emunah. Only if there's emunah. Now note, we Bnei Israel are called ma'aminim, Bnei ma'aminim. The avos, bechlal, are always referred to as a mean of emunah. We once mentioned, I think, from Rabbi Freimel Zal, that if you study... Huh? if you study, Rebbe Frenelzal brings in Enik Shabbos that if you study the years, the ages of the Ois HaKadoshim, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, what's the gematria? Avram Avinu lived 175. Yitzchak Avinu 208 gives us. Yitzchak Avinu, I'm sorry, right. Yitzchak is big gematria 208. Yitzchak Avinu lived 180. 180 and 175 is 255. Yaakov 355. Yaakov Avinu 147. 355 plus 147 is 502, which is exactly bigematria emuna pshuta. The words emuna pshuta, showing us that what was, in other words, that why this is why the Gemara uses this term that we are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. That what's the tachlis of the Avos HaKadoshim? What was their whole life filled with? This union of emuna pshuta. By Avram Avinu it says v'he'emin b'Hashem v'yachshiver lo'yitztaka. So we see that the zechus avos is totally an emuna. Tefillah is emuna. Without emuna, a person doesn't get up to daven. And if a person davens, if a person says manya, the whole shachris mincha marav, and he doesn't have true faith in Hashem, you would honestly say that's not a tefillah. It's not classified as tefillah. The whole concept of tefillah means that although I know that this, I believe that probably this morning the sun is going to rise and I'm going to go to work and get paid exactly $60 like I've gotten paid for the past 6 months since I got my last raise and this and that and everything. The fact that a person gets up to daven to Hashem every day shows that that person believes that every single day there's a chiddush ha'olam, there's a chiddush ma'aseh bereshis, and Hashem is capable of overriding anything that would have to be the norm, that would be considered the norm for that day, could be overridden and done away with, and Hashem could be mashpia, a whole new shefa and chiyas to the person that day. So Rabbeinu Zal says now, so therefore, without emunah, a person can't be helped either by refuah, tefillah, chosavos, ki kol elu heim b'chinas emunah kanal, because these three are a concept of emunah. V'gam ein. That's okay. So we've covered these three items so far. We're dealing with a sick person, and we're telling him chas v'shalom that without emunah, he's cutting himself off from three things that might have been able to help him: medicine, tefillah, or chosavos. Now Rabbeinu Zal goes to a fourth thing, something that's not tefillah but tza'aka. Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'gam ein moil ha'chayla koil tza'akos shel och u'ganechos." A person through a deficiency in emunah can put himself in a situation where even screaming to Hashem alone, without words. Tefillah means when you put your screams into words. Tza'aka means just screaming alone without mentioning words, where a person says "Oi," which the Zohar HaKadosh talks about, and Rabbeinu Zal talks about the significance of this tza'aka. Rabbeinu Zal on Torah Chof Aleph and the Likutei brings whole chidushim as to how that tza'aka is moiled the moichin, and there's so many things that are brought about when a person screams to Hashem, just the scream alone without words. Tza'akoseinu yedei talumais. But Rabbeinu Zal says through a lack of emunah, a person puts himself in a position where even this tza'aka will not help him. Shelifa'omim moil ha'chayla elu ha'koilais. Rabbeinu Zal says at times a sick person can be helped through this screaming. When he screams out because of the pain of the illness alone, that alone causes that in heaven, when they see a Jew screaming out of pain, at times the screaming alone arouses a rachmanis in heaven and causes them, it brings about a refuah. But through a deficiency in emunah, chas v'shalom, even this couldn't help the person. Why? Rabbeinu Zal explains, Ki haganichois v'tzakois och hanal. This krechtzing, ganicha means when a person krechts, and anocha and tza'aka means when a person screams. Och, oi, those screams, heim koil b'loi dibur. That's a form of voice without speech, meaning it's sound without a constriction of placing the sound into kalim. Words are actually kalim, where a person takes the power of sound and constricts it into specific divisions, letters which form words, which form sentences. Rabbeinu Zal says this tza'aka is a concept of koil b'loi dibur. V'koil ze bechinas avon, and koil, sound, voice, is a concept of the avos, the forefathers of the Jews. Ki ha-koil kolul me'esh mayim ruach. The Tikkunei Zohar tells us that koil, the voice of a person, is a combination of three things: fire, water, and air. In order for a person to be able to speak correctly, it requires, if his throat dries up completely, you'll notice that people who have laryngitis, what does it mean? The throat has become dried out as a result of a deficiency in the side of mayim, he can't speak. So too, the concept of the ikar dibur is through eish, an union of hislavus, fire, shivchi kamayim. Rabbeinu Zal brings this in many terms in the Quran, that the whole koyach hadibur is only when a person is aroused to speaking. Any type of speech, regardless of what it is, that's a concept of the aside of eish, fire. And the actual bringing forth of the words is totally in air. It's bringing together the respiratory system. Any defect in the respiratory system is going to cause a defect in speech. So the Tikkunei Zohar tells us that koil is kolol from eish, mayim, ruach. These three ingredients, she'ein bechinas tlas avon. The Tikkunei Zohar says these three, eish, mayim, ruach, correspond to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Veheim nirin v'nizgalen rak al yidei emunah. And we explained earlier that the effects of the Avos HaKadoshim can only be felt through Emunah. So if Koil is the Avos, and the Avos can only be felt, can only affect a situation through Emunah, then Koil also will not be able to affect anything unless it's combined with Emunah. So Rabbeinu Zal says, Emunah is the fourth Yesod, not the Eish, Mayim, and Ruach. The Eish, Mayim, and Ruach are only able to do anything constructive only when they are associated with the fourth Yesod, which is offer, dirt, which is mani de kulu. Through a deficiency in emunah, or a person that suffers a fall, a yerida in emunah, ein moyeloi gam hakoilis kanal. Then the koil won't help either, chas v'shalom. V'gam al yidei ze bi'atzmoi ein moyeloi refuah. Rabbeinu, period. Okay, so we covered four things so far. We covered refuah, tefillah, zechus avos, and koil. All four won't help. Now Rabbeinu Zal adds on an addendum, a PS. Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'gam al yidei ze bi'atzmoi ein moyeloi refuah." And now, for this same reason, medicine won't help at all either, whatsoever. Ki ikar harafuah hi al yidei. In other words, we mentioned a reason earlier why medicine won't help, because we mentioned that medicine comes from herbs, and herbs, we said, emunah zu say there's roim, so herbs were dependent on emunah. Now Rabbeinu Zal is going to give a reason why medication won't help, based on this concept of the Daled Yesodos, Eish, Mayim, Ruach, Afor. Watch this. Rabbeinu Zal says, V'gam al yidei ze bi'atzmoi ein moyeloi refuah. Based on this concept of the Daled Yesodos, that will also prove our point that without emunah, medicine can't help. Why? Ki ikar harafuah hi al yidei his mazkus hayesodos. When a person becomes sick, does Sifrei Kabbalah explain what physically causes the illness? An unbalance. Each and every, we said, Rebbe Zal mentioned many times, that lahavdil, the scientists discuss a concept of 103 elements, or whatever they're up to today, 120, 150 elements, basic elements which can't be broken down any further. These are the basic elements in the creation of the world. We believe, according to the Torah HaKadoshah, that there are four basic elements, and everything in this world comes from these four elements. It's either a mixture of them, or one of them, or two of them, or three of them, or all four of them combined based on a certain mix. So that, for starters, each and every single human being is made up of these Daled Yesodos. Each and every single human being has a concept of heat in him, certain motion, the pulsating of the heart, which is friction, which is heat within the body. There's liquid in the body, there's mayim, there's ruach, there's air. The whole functioning of the body is based on air going in and out. Neshima, koil haneshama, talel kod neshima, and ofor, which the Torah HaKadosh tells us that when Hashem first formed Adam, he took ofor from all parts of the words and made man. So the Sifrei Kabbalah tell us that when a person gets sick, what is it usually caused? It's based on an unbalancing within the body between some of the Yesodos. For example, fever. A person has fever. What does that mean? It means that an unbalanced situation has occurred within the body where the Yesod of Eish has gone out of its boundary, it's become more than it should be, and it's overriding the mayim. These two, the eish and mayim within the body, are supposed to be at a perfect balance, which generates a temperature of 98.6 Fahrenheit, whatever it is. When there's an unbalance in these daled yesaidos, that's what causes fever, or that's what causes chills, or that's what causes leukemia, or any type of illness. The Sifrei Kabbalah tell us is usually based on an unbalancing between these daled yesaidos. Rabbeinu Zal says, Ki ikar harafua hi al yidei his mazgus hayesaidos. The main concept of curing a sick person is based on being able to juggle these yesaidos and put them back into their proper mode, proper sequence, proper quantities. Ki yesh daled yesaidos. There are these four basic elements: eish, mayim, ruach, ofor. V'tzorich lozeh, period. V'tzorich lozeh chacham godol. This requires a very, very smart person, sheyeda al pi doktorai, who should know through the knowledge of medicines, lemazek hayesaidos, to be able to balance these daled yesaidos within the body. Sheyesh b'chol echad v'echad, lemazek hayesaidos sheyesh b'chol echad v'echad min ha'asabim. We need a doctor who has such deep knowledge to be able to know how to balance the four yesaidos, these four basic elements, as they appear in herbs, in grasses, in medication, according to the medicine that this sick person needs, according to the type of spoilage or deficiency that has occurred within the body, based on a spoilage within this daled yesaidos. Okay, so we see that in order for a doctor to be able to do his work, just discussing this scientifically, if we say that an illness is brought about due to an unbalancing, this is why, for example, doctors say when a person has a high fever, one of the most important things is that the person should drink a lot. Why? Because high fever means that the aside of eish within the body has gotten too great. How do you deal with that? You have to water it down. You have to be mezgaber. You have to cause the aside of mayim within the body to build up, to be able to combat and balance the eish so that things could get back to normal. So when a doctor is going to prescribe a medication for a person, if he's a quack, so he's going to do whatever he learned in school, whatever he saw in a textbook, or whatever his wife happens to like, or whatever costs more money. But if he's a sincere doctor, he would have to have this knowledge of being able to know what yesodus, how each herb is constructed, how much water it has, how much heat it has, how much heat-giving force it has, how much offer it has, how much air it has, so that the intake of this specific type of herb, when presented in such and such a way, will cause the problem, the unbalancing that exists in the body, to be able to straighten out, to get back to normal. Which, again, note, this is totally on a straightening out, balancing out the daled yesodus. Rabbeinu Zal brings gam behachras hakoil yesh bechinas his mazgus hayesodus. Here also, in the differentiation that exists when a person gives forth sound, speech, or words, also it's dependent on how these daled yesodus mix within the body. If there's more liquid in the body, or more heat, or more ofor, or more avir, that's going to determine how the voice comes forth. V'alkein, therefore, ayidei pigam emuna, through a deficiency in emuna, shaydei nifgam bechinas hadaled yesodus, that causes a pigam in the daled yesodus. Why? Because we said that emuna is Ofor. Emuna is Eretz, which is Ofor, and Ofor is one of the most important to the daled yesodus. So if the Emuna is deficient, the daled yesodus are going to be deficient. Because all four daled yesodus are only able to come forth to have their true effect only through Ofor, only through earth. Shehi mana dekulu, that is the substance of everything. Alkein ein le refuah. That's why when a person is deficient in emunah, there's no way for him to be able to have a refuah. Now let's explain this let's take the example of fire. You have fire. Can a fire be chal on nothing? The answer is no. In order for a fire to function, it has to be attached to a match or a candle or a wick. It needs something. Here's an example. We have this yesod of eish, and we see that fire alone, in other words, light a match, and you have the fire, try to pull the match away from the fire. Can the fire exist as an entity? The answer is no way. Because we said that Likutei says, Ofor mana de kulhu, that the other three Yesodis, Mayim, Ruach, and Eish, cannot function in any way whatsoever without the Ofor. Ofor is the Keli. Mayim. Can you have water without it being contained in some type of vessel? Is there any concept of a metzias of mayim just suspended somewhere? No, it's not called mayim. It's nothing. It can't exist in that way. It must be contained in a keli, in some type of earthenware, or no matter what you make the item, coming from this yesod of ofor, which contains it and makes it accessible to us, usable. It makes it into a tangible item. So too with avir. The Likutei says, Ofor mana de kulu, that Ofor is the keli of all the Yesodis, and none of the Yesodis can function without Ofor. So if Ofor represents Emunah, if you are lacking in Ofor, how can you dream of being able to get a cure from the Hismazgus of the Dal Yesodis if you're missing the most important one? You understand? So this is a second proof that Rabbeinu Zal gave how without Emunah, medicine will not be able to affect the cure for the person whatsoever. Because the whole metzias of medicine being able to work is dependent on a juggling of the Dal Yesodis. If a person has a deficiency in Emunah, it means that by him, Ofor does not, he's cut out. 1/4 of the Daled Yesodis is gone by him. It's non-existent by him. If Ofor is not there, the other 3 Yesodis cannot function whatsoever. Period.
How literal is this taken that, that function of the Daled Yesodis can depend on Ofor? Because, for example, the example you gave with fire, if I go to a gas range,
right,
light it,
right,
it's burning from the gas.
Yes.
From the gas range.
The answer is possibly. Where does gas come from? Others comes from the ground or whatever. Or again, here's another example. The fire had to come from the range which is made of substance. Can you have fire as an entity alone? That metzias, anybody, I'm saying yes or no, it must come from some substance, be it uranium, be it a nuclear substance, be it paper, be it chemical, sulfur, regardless of anything, it's totally in some way in this yesod of Ofor. In other words, I'm quoting Tikkun Zohar, and this is brought in several places in Likutei, this quote, Ofor mana de kulum. And again, we're not necessarily that knowledgeable in science, in the general sciences, etc., but I'm positive that if you study this along scientific lines, you'll be able to understand how scientifically this metzias is not possible. Period. Now note how this applies to us in practical terms. We mentioned Shabbos. Rabbeinu Zal says that as far as a Jew, the avodah of a man is considered just about insignificant unless he's married. By a Jew, he must get married. Why? Because Ofor mana de kulu. Because the Malchus is the most important sphera. The Malchus is the wife, the Isha. If a person is Zocher to be married, the Zocher represents the first 3 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, or the upper 9 spheres. The Nekeva is the Malchus, the Shechina. Without the Malchus, the Zocher is nothing. Without a wife, the Pasuk says, Loi toiv heyoi salam levadoi. Rav Nosson Zal once said that a person who's levada is loi toiv chas v'shalom. In other words, that type of word, that's how important it is. And that's obviously the reason why the first mitzvah in the Torah is the mitzvah of getting married, pru'uravu. Why? Because we see it in this Torah L'Kedaman. Because based on this Likutei Zohar, that Ofor mana de kulu, without Ofor you have nothing. You could have tzitzis, tefillah, and this, that, but it doesn't really have a significance until the person is zocher to get married. Now, we're not saying that if a person is not married, chas v'shalom, you shouldn't put on tzitzis. But we're saying in comparison, when a person is zocher to get married, that's what gives a shleimus to his avodah. That's where the avodah becomes significant. Next. Rabbeinu Zal says,
because those are the times they say that nothing is curing it except for the person who wants to.
Just that's the best example of it, because the whole concept of psychosomatic illnesses is when a person is lacking in emunah. Rabbeinu Zal brings in the Torah Mi sheyesh lo emunah chayav chayim. A person, how do psychosomatic illnesses come about? A person gets into a bad frame of mind, sad, things aren't going that well for him, so he makes himself sick. That's the expression he developed. He makes himself sick. Rabbeinu Zal brings in the Likutei that a person who is zeicha to have emunah in Hashem, that person is alive. That person will never get sick. What's that? He'll never get sick. Meaning that person, no matter what kind of difficulty he'll encounter in life, be it at the job or with his wife, anything, he's always going to find a good in it. He believes Be'emunah shleima that kol man david b'shmeilah, that whatever Hashem does is for the good. And if I'm going through some type of suffering, it's only for the good, as we're going to see later in this chapter in Likutei. Rabbeinu Zal brings in Torah Samachein Likutei that when a tzaddik undergoes pain, when a tzaddik has to sit in a dentist chair and they're pulling a teeth and he's going through excruciating pain, or when a person, what happens? The person clenches his eyes shut very, very tight from the pain. Rabbeinu Zal explains here that that's the natural reaction of a human being to pain is the closing, or even an animal, is the closing of the eyes. Why? Rabbeinu Zal has a whole explanation there that when a person wants to see in a distance, what do you do to be able to see in a distance? You squint. Squinting increases a person's vision. This is a chiddush, because usually we would say that in order for the eye to see, the wider that the eye is open, the further you can see. And we note that it's just the opposite. The more a person closes the eye, that allows him at times to be able to see further than when the eye was in its natural state. Rabbeinu Zal says, what does this refer to? There's gashmius and ruchnius. The ruchnius, the spirituality, is much further distance away from the person. There's an interesting Zohar Kodesh, where the Zohar Kodesh says, we're going way off tangent, where the Zohar Kodesh says about Yeshaya Hanavi and Moshe Rabbeinu, that by Moshe Rabbeinu said, Hazinu Hashamayim va'adabeiro v'sishma ha'oretz imreifi. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Hazinu Hashamayim v'sishma ha'oretz. Yeshaya Hanavi said, Shimi Shamayim v'ha'azini eretz. He used the reverse, he reversed the word, verbs. The Zohar Kodesh says, why? What's the difference in Hebrew between shmiya and ha'azana? The word shmiya is when you want to hear something that's close to you, you use the term shmiya. The word ha'azana is when you're listening to something at a distance. The word lahazin means something that's close by. The word shmiya is something that's in a shmiya rechaika. Shmiya is something at a distance. Shmur rechaika. So the Zohar Kodesh says, Moshe Rabbeinu was one unique individual in the world, where if we had to judge between two things, heaven and earth, which was he closer to? He was closer to heaven. Therefore, when he spoke, he used the term ha'azinu hashamayim v'sishma ha'oretz. He was closer to heavenliness, therefore he used the verb ha'azinu by shamayim, and sishma related to oretz. Whereas Yeshaya Hanavi, who was a lower level than Moshe Rabbeinu, he was a fantastic tzaddik, but compared to Moshe Rabbeinu, a much lower level, he said, Shimi shamayim v'azini eretz. So we see that generally, to us, to regular type people, have spirituality is referred to something that's very distant from us. It's in a distance. So Rabbeinu Zal says that in order for a person to be able to see the ruchnius, to be able to draw it, he has to close his eyes, mechezu dahai alma. He has to be able to block out everything in this world in order to be able to see past it. Like, in other words, if we would picture that the 5 mile radius around the person is Olam Hazeh, that's this world, that's the physical world. If he could see past that 5 mile point, he could see into the spiritual world. How do you get to see it at a distance? By closing your eyes. Rabbeinu Zal says, by a person closing his eyes from the gashmias, from all the physical matter in this world, a person is able to see into the next world. What makes you close your eyes? Pain. When a person has pain inflicted on him, the natural reaction is a closing of the eyes. So Rabbeinu Zal says this is one of the reasons why pain is a very beneficial item for a tzaddik. Pain and suffering. Why? Because a tzaddik is one who wants to be masig, very great hasogos. He wants to be able to see on high, very, very far away. In order to be able to see on high, one of the ways of doing it is by being able to clench your eyes, close your eyes. That brings you to a very exalted frame of mind, very high level. What causes that? Pain. So we see here an example that when a person has emunah, pain could be a favor to him. He could look at it, he could kiss the pain in a sense, by knowing that he knows that this could bring him closer to Hashem. The Gemara says that if a person would know how good that just as blood, just as salt takes out the bad blood from meat, that's to what extent suffering takes out the sins, erases the sins within a person. If a person has this faith, they believe in the words of the Torah, the words of Hashem, such a person, there's no way that they could inflict a psychosomatic illness on themselves, because he's always in a happy frame of mind. The emunah keeps him alive, it keeps him happy. Whereas a deficiency in emunah can cause either psychosomatic illnesses or even actual physical illnesses, because what happens is he's pulled out the four from his body. There's four elements that his body is functioning on. The fourth one is offer, which is emunah. Remove the emunah, chas v'shalom, he's got the other three yisodos bouncing around in his body any which way they want, and they can very easily the balance becomes upset, the person becomes sick, chas v'shalom.
Psychosomatic can make a person blind or deaf.
100%.
And they can't find anything organically wrong.
Rabbeinu Zal said that the machshava has, this is something that's taught in our form. Rabbeinu Zal said that the machshava has an incredible power. A person can create with thought. A person can concentrate and stop a bullet, stop a gun from shooting, stop a bullet from hitting him just by the power of concentration alone. You see, Rabbeinu Zal is giving credence to this concept of that you definitely can talk yourself into an illness or talk yourself out of an illness. Just as a person could put himself in a frame of mind of simcha. There are people who are in the hospital with horrible diseases, and they just put themselves in a fantastic frame of mind. There are stories in the newspapers about this. A guy made a miraculous recovery just because he was determined. He wasn't going to let the physical illness knock him down. He overcame a physical illness through frame of mind. Let's continue. Rabbeinu Zal says, we're just going to be able to start the next paragraph because we have to stop. A person who, Rahman al-Islam, is suffering from a deficiency in emunah, how does he fix this up? A person has to dig and find the waters, the waters which cause the emunah, the faith, to grow. Note, we compared emunah before. The Gemara said emunah zeh seder's run. Emunah is compared to seeds. Seeds need water to grow. Emunah has to be watered. That's the terminology that Rabbeinu Zal is using here. Ve'elu hamayim hein bechinois eitzos. What waters are we talking about here? We're talking about advice. Advice is the water which helps faith grow, which helps a person's faith in Hashem and tzaddikim grow. The Bechinas, as the pasuk says, Oide shimcha kiyosiso fele, eitzos meirochoik emuna oman. The pasuk says, Yeshayahu says, I give praise to Hashem who has done wondrous things. Eitzos meirochoik emuna. That eitzos from way, meirochoik here means from way back. The original advice that goes way back, is what helps the emunah. Emunah uman means to raise. Vayhi oimein es hadassah. Mordechai was the one who raised Esther Hamalka. So eitzos is what raises, R-A-I-S-E-S, raises the emunah. Rabbeinu Zal says, Shayidei ha'eitzos gedei lo ha'emunah. It's through a person receiving advice, that's what helps the emunah to grow. Ve'eitzos hein bechinas oimek halev. Advice is a concept of the depths of the heart. Hainu, what does this mean? Kishen iskalkel v'noifel ha'emunah. When the emunah, when a person's faith becomes spoiled and it falls, ad she'ein moil afilu koil tza'aka, to the extent where not only won't medicine help him or tfilos chosavos, but even tza'aka, even screaming won't help. Shehu koil b'lei dibur. Tza'aka is a form of sound without speech. It's sound without any tzimtzum, without any constriction. Azai tzrichen litzoik min halev levad. Then a person gets to a point where he has to scream, not just scream where there's no words, but where there's no sound, he has to give forth a scream without any sound whatsoever. A scream that comes from the heart alone. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says in Eicha, tzoak libom el Hashem. Not tzoak pihem la Hashem, not that their mouth scream to Hashem, their heart scream to Hashem. Shehu tzakas halev levad belikoil. This refers to a scream that emanates from the heart without any sound whatsoever. No sound, just a scream from the heart. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, mima'amakim krosicho Hashem. Mima'amakim krosicho Hashem. I call out to Hashem mima'amakim, from the depths. The Zohar Kodesh says, meimon kadaliba, that a person has to call out to Hashem from the depths of his heart. Va'omek halev ze bechinas eitzos. Now we're going to tie together these two things. We started off by saying that if a person feels a deficiency in emunah, he has to water the emunah. What's the water on emunah? Eitzos. And we proved it from a pasuk. We showed a pasuk which ties together eitzos and emunah. Then we went to a second topic where we said that we had mentioned before that a person through a fall in emunah falls to such a level where not only won't tefillah help him, but even koil, even screaming won't help him. But what's the next level? After tefillah and after koil, there's a third item called tzoak libom, screaming from the heart. That might help. That we haven't disqualified yet. Rabbeinu Zal says screaming from the heart is a concept of eitzah, is a concept of advice. The depths of the heart and advice are one and the same. Why? Because there's a pasuk that says, Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'omek halev ze bechinas eitzos." The depths of the heart is a concept of advice. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, "Maim amukim eitzah b'leivish." Deep waters, advice within the heart of a person. That a person who's zeichet to be a Talmud, a person who's zeichet to be a great chacham, chachma, Torah knowledge is compared to water many times. We once mentioned from the Zohar Kodesh that wisdom, das, is a combination of chachma and bina. Which letter represents chachma? Yud. Which letter represents bina? Mem. Ben arboim labina. There's a mission in Perkei always ben arboim labina. So that the word mayim refers to wisdom. Mayim, you have the yud in the middle, the chachma in the middle, surrounded by two mems. Mem is bina. We mentioned many times that the Sifrei Kabbalah tell us that the spheroids are represented as concentric circles. The highest one is the one in the middle, so that chachma is in the middle, surrounded by bina, surrounded by das, surrounded by chesed, so on and so forth. The word mayim is an illustration of the concept of seichel, chachma surrounded by bina. So the pasuk says, mayim amukim eitzah b'leivish, that a person who's zeichet to have the power of advice, the power to give good advice, he has these deep waters in his heart. So now we see that these two are that eitzah is associated with mayim, that this water that's needed to help the plants grow, the emunah blossom, this water is a concept of eitzah. And therefore, when a person suffers to an extent where screaming doesn't help him because of a deficiency in emunah, then a person has to scream to Hashem from the heart alone, without any sound whatsoever, just screaming from the depths of one's heart. And that's how a person could be zeichet to refill. This advice is referred to as these deep waters. And through this advice that's revealed in the world, meaning, people get to a level where they know how to deal with life. Through the advice that they've gotten, they know how to deal with different situations, all the variety of situations that come up in life. That's what allows the emunah to be able to grow. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, that when the eitzah is kitikuna, when the eitzah gets fixed up, the emunah automatically gets fixed up also. We're going to hold it over here for now. Next week in Hashem, when we start, we'll review this last piece and we'll pick up from here. But for now, we've touched on a few items. We touched on this inyan that a person through a deficiency in emunah could put himself in a situation where we list off a whole whole series of items that won't be able to help him. Even tefillah won't help him. Not just tefillah, but there's something in a sense that's higher than tefillah, which is when a person becomes so desperate that his cry, his call to Hashem is in such desperation that he can't even put it into words. If you recall, we once explained from the Likutei that this is the difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day where Rosh Hashanah is in a sense on a higher level than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a day where we put our confession into words. Rosh Hashanah is a day, it's the actual Yom HaDin itself, where the din is so powerful, this this lave, bino libo, the din is so strict on Rosh Hashanah, it's called Yom HaDin, that we can't even put our cry into words. That's the side of the Tkiya Shofar. The blowing of the shofar, it's sound without words. We're calling out to Hashem, this scream to Hashem, which shofar is the Ikar HaMutoka Sadinim. Now Rabbeinu says in this Torah that there's a third type of scream. There's tefillah, there's koil, and there's tzakas halev. There's tzoak libo mil Hashem, where a person is so desperate that he can't even put his scream into a sound. He's so broken inside, even where tefillah wouldn't help, and even where tzaka wouldn't help. And that call, that cry, is the concept of Eitzah, which is the concept of the waters that help the emunah to grow. That's what we're going to explain more next week. Which is the concept of the waters that help the emunah to grow.